It's really a delight for me to introduce Eric Silagy. I have known Eric for 30 plus years. We were a little blonder back then in the early 1990s. So we're thrilled that he's made the journey up here to speak with us this afternoon. So just a brief introduction to Eric, who is the Chairman, President, and CEO of Florida Power and Light Company, which is a subsidiary of NextEra Energy Incorporated. Eric was appointed President in December 2011, CEO in 2014, became Chairman in March 2022, and he has about 2.5 weeks, I think, left in that role as he is retiring in the middle of May. Eric has worked for NextEra companies for just over 2 decades. For FPL, he served as Senior Vice President of Regulatory and State Governmental Affairs and as Chief Development Officer, managing all generation development, including solar and natural gas and nuclear energy projects. At NextEra Energy Resources, he served as Vice President and General Manager of the Southern Region and Vice President of Business Development. Eric prior to joining NextEra Energy, I wanted to mention this, he served as Vice President, Mergers and Acquisitions at Entergy Wholesale Operations and as VP and Managing Director, Southeast Asia for the Wing Group. He also worked for U.S. Senator J. Bennett Johnston of Louisiana in several capacities, including Chief of Staff, and that's when I first met Eric. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Economics from the University of Texas at Austin, a JD from Georgetown, and is a member of the Maryland and U.S. Supreme Court bars. And I did notice that the one thing that Eric does not have is a degree from TCU. And given the fact that he is retiring, I think in his retirement he should come and do an energy MBA here as well.
There you go.
Thank you. Please welcome Eric.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael. I appreciate it. So it's a pleasure being here. I'm going to stand up on stage so I can see the room a little bit. But thank you. Michael and I were chatting. I actually brought a presentation that I actually pulled out of my desk from 2007 when we first put together a program of working together. Back then it was called FPL Energy and TCU. And so the relationship with TCU goes back a very long way. I used to run our business in Texas and Oklahoma and on the renewable side. And even back then, we saw what a great student body is here at TCU and where the opportunities are to work together. And Michael was instrumental in making that happen. So Michael, thank you for that. It's really an exciting time within the industry. And the panel talked a little bit about what's going on. I thought I'd give you a little insight as to what NextEra and FPL has been up to. Before that, just for those who may not be as familiar with NextEra, it's a publicly traded company that's primarily made up of 2 big businesses, NextEra Energy Resources. John DiDonato is a leader in, that is actually the largest producer of electricity in the world from wind and solar and the use of battery storage across 40 plus states and a good chunk of Canada. And then Florida Power and Light, which is the largest rate-regulated utility in America, whether you want to measure it by number of customers or amount of electricity that's produced or the amount of electricity that's sold. Thankfully, we have a lot of warm weather in Florida and air conditioners, so we sell a lot of electricity. It's a big company no matter how you want to measure it. Just short of 90,000 miles of transmission and distribution as an example. And I'll give you some other facts and figures as I go through it. But no matter how you measure it, it's a big company, probably one of the biggest companies that a lot of folks haven't really heard of. By market cap, we're the largest in the world as an electric. By market cap, we're larger than a lot of names that are pretty big, whether it's Morgan Stanley or American Express, Netflix, which is rebounded here and they're up quite a bit, or even GE. It's a company that has been very focused on renewable energy, but has also grown and provided a real significant return for our shareholders over the last 10 plus years. So this is a market cap that's gone from what used to be just a fraction of this, 30th in electric space, to the largest in the world with a 700% return on shareholders. So our focus has been on economics, while at the same time providing customers with what we consider to be the best value proposition in the country and the promise of providing clean, reliable, and affordable energy. That to me is what resiliency really looks like. It has to be all of those. If you want to be clean, that's terrific, but you have to also be, for your customers, reliable and affordable. I don't know any customers who I've spoken to have said, gosh, I don't want you to be clean. They all want us to be clean. They don't want to pay more for it, though. Right? And they also want to make sure that the lights are on and the air conditioner is working while you're clean. And if you give up on any of the other two, clean goes out the window. I also would submit to you that being clean, while it is now very much the focus and socially it has become kind of the area that everybody wants to talk about, it's really about good business. Yes, being clean is also the right thing to do for future generations, for the planet. I agree with all of that. But it's also really, really good business. And that's how we've been focused on it in the company. And I'll give you one example that my responsibility is Florida Power and Light, so I'll give you that example in Florida. So in Florida, 1 in 8 jobs in the state is tied to tourism. And it's a big economy. Florida's a $1.4 trillion economy. Not quite as big as Texas, but just behind Texas. Right? 1 in 8 jobs is tied to tourism. More people visited Florida last year than any place in the world. About 127 million people came to Florida. More people went to Orlando last year than the entire state of California as a tourist. And California spends like $1 squillion saying come to California, right? 64 million people went just to Orlando. I submit to you that most people have to save all year long to take that family vacation. They work really hard to figure out where they're going to go and play. It's disposable income, it's precious. And if you've worked all year long to go on that family vacation and you're on final approach in Orlando International or Miami or pick any of your cities in Florida and you penetrate a smog bank, or you go walk on the beach and get tar on your feet, or you can't swim in the water because it's foul, you're not coming back. You're not going to come back to Florida. You're going to go somewhere else. And when that happens, 1 in 8 jobs goes down the drain, and the economy hurts. So being clean is good business. People move to Florida from all over the world for a variety of reasons. Low taxes like Texas is one, but also a great environment is another. You have a choice of where you move when you retire. If you can't breathe the air, you're not moving to Florida. If you don't move to Florida and it stops growing, it's bad for business. So for me, it's always been about doing the right thing also economically, to make sure that what we do is sustainable. Because if it's not economic, the policy of whether it's clean or anything else is not politically sustainable. And therefore, it won't be sustainable, period. So that's what our focus has been. So how have we done this? Well, we've been on a march to do this for quite some time. And it's been a real investment in changing the way we do business. Back in 2001, we burned more oil than any utility in America to generate electricity. In 2001, we actually burned over 40 million barrels of oil to generate electricity. This past year, we burned none. We burned a couple 100,000 barrels of low sulfur diesel because I make sure we have backup fuel at all of our plants in case, God forbid, we have a problem and we need to burn it. And I have to prove that I can burn it as a backup fuel every year. So we burn a couple 100,000 barrels of diesel to test it every year. Otherwise, we'd have burned zero. Now, was this something that we did overnight? No. Was this something that we did because it was cool to be green? No. Nobody was really talking about this in 2001. Matter of fact, we had a lot of people who said you shouldn't be actually making a transition. But we did it because we didn't like actually the volatility around oil pricing. We didn't like the environmental footprint around it at the time, but most importantly, what we really saw was an opportunity to embrace new technology that would end up saving our customers money over the long term. So we went on this march to modernize our fleet. And I say march intentionally, because anything having to do with the energy transition is a march. It's not a sprint. Anybody who says, oh, if we just do this, we're good. If we just do that, we'll be all right, is selling you a load of crap. Okay? It's a march. So what did we do? How did we do this? What do we call modernizing? Well, this is what modernizing for us looks like. Let's see if we can get this to advance. We had a little problem with this earlier, so I don't know if it'll go. Kayla's still in the room? Oh, there we go. All right, so there's no sound on this. Well, a little bit. This is how we modernize our power plants. And I will tell you, this is about the most fun you can legally have with dynamite. And as any of you good Southern boys will know, you love blowing stuff up, right? Come on. I loved it. But what was really nice was what the end result was and how we modernized into using combined cycle. What I showed you before was one of our plants. That one happened to be at right up by the Fort Lauderdale International Airport, built in the 1960s. We built a lot of power plants in the late 50s and early 60s because air conditioning came to Florida. They were all oil-fired. We transitioned to combined cycle plants like this one, which is 35% more fuel efficient, 52% reduction in CO2, 97% reduction in SOx, 98% reduction in NOx, 99% reduction in particulate matter. But what the customers really loved is a 35% reduction in fuel. So think about it this way. Well, I'm a gearhead and I love cars, so I'll put it in terms of that. We took a 1962 Cadillac, big car, big fins, big trunk, big engine, right? Maybe get 6 miles a gallon, and we blew it up. Hopefully you'd park it in the garage. We replaced it, right, with a hybrid Ford Fusion. We went from 6 miles a gallon to 40 miles a gallon. We actually produced more electricity, burning less fuel. And we have a much more modern plant that takes less people to run and breaks down a lot less, which saves a lot of money as well. So in the process of actually investing billions of dollars, and yes, each one of these plants is over $1 billion. That plant is $1.2 billion. And we've done that across the entire fleet. Last year, we spent $9 billion on CapEx at FPL in Florida. The year before that, $8.2 billion. FPL is the largest investor in the state of Florida, by far. NextEra, by the way, is one of the top 5 investors of any kind of company in America, consistently, every year. Bigger than any energy company in the United States, by far, in the way of amount we invest. And yet we're profitable. And our bills are actually lower at FPL than any other investor-owned utility in Florida, and among the lowest among the whole state, which we have 54 utilities in Florida, because we have a lot of municipals and cooperatives, who, by the way, are nonprofit and don't pay taxes. Yeah, we paid a lot of taxes. We paid over $1 billion in taxes last year, too. We're the largest taxpayer. And yet our bills are lower. And, oh, by the way, the reliability goes up when you modernize your fleet and do a few other things I'm going to talk about. We were the most reliable electric provider in America last year, and the year before, and the year before that, and for the last 6 years in a row. So anybody who says you have to be one or the other, i.e., if you're reliable, you're not going to be clean. If you're affordable, you're not going to be reliable. I reject that. It's not easy, because you have to go on a march and be committed to that march over years, and you have to take some risks, and you have to be willing to do things that people didn't want you to do. I can't tell you how many times I had people say, don't blow up that old plant. It's paid for. It's fully depreciated. We know how to run it. I was at a town hall meeting, when one fine gentleman came up to me, called me son, said, "Son, you know I've been fishing offshore here since before you were born." I said, "Well, that's nice. It's great fishing out there." He said, "Yeah, how do you think I get home?" I said, I don't know. I don't know what you mean." He said, "I look out at those red and white stacks, and that's my beacon home. I don't want you tearing this plant down." Swear to God. I said, "Well, there's this thing called GPS now. I really think you should get that," right? But, you know, everybody has their reasons to not change, because change is scary. Change requires you to actually do something that may not always work out exactly as you see or predict. But if you don't embrace it, then you're going to get passed by. So we've embraced a whole culture around innovation and doing things differently because it benefits our customers. Like embracing smart grid technology. We were one of the first companies to install smart meters across our whole system. I've got 6 million customers. That's 11.5 million, 12 million people. Every single customer has a smart meter. What's so important about that? It gives you visibility into how the system is running like nothing ever has before. And we're now even doing things like predicting outages before they happen with a 95% confidence factor. We're actually knocking on people's doors 20, 30, 40 times a day and saying, we're predicting that within the next 24 to 72 hours, you're going to have an outage at your home and you need to call an electrician because it's behind the meter. And this is what we're hearing. And the first time we ever did it, I'll never forget it, we actually sent a lineman out and he knocked on somebody's door and told him that. And the first thing the guy said was, "How do you know that?" And he said, "I don't know, corporate called and told me." And he said, "Holy cow, your corporation's spying on me," right? And so we had to actually go through the whole educational process of how we talk about this. And explain to people, I don't care what you're doing behind the meter. I don't even want to know. But I do know how much electricity you use. And I do know when there's voltage drops and when there's time between those voltage drops. And by using algorithms that we've developed, we can actually now predict what's going to happen because of those things. Same thing with on the lines. We now have installed hundreds of thousands of devices across the line, so actually our system talks to each other. And when we have an outage, we actually know where the outage is, rather than sending out multiple crews to try to find the outage. We send the right people to the right place with the right equipment at the right time, the first time. That may not sound like a big deal, but it makes a huge difference in how much money you can save in running your system. When you multiply that over 88,000 miles of line, 365 days a year, you start taking tens of millions of dollars out of the system in costs. And when you take costs out of the system, it gives you money to be able to turn right around and invest it back in without raising the bills on customers. Again, reliability and affordability. So thinking differently about this, like undergrounding more. So at 88,000 miles, 40% of our system's now underground. And we're on a march, and it is a march, multi-decadal march to underground our system. Why? Because we know it pays off every single day, not just during storms. We have hurricanes in Florida. You get them in Texas too, right? Maybe not up here as much, but you have other events like Uri. Right? Underground lines do better in ice storms. Underground lines do better in the thunderstorms that come ripping through here every single summer afternoon, it seems like, right? Because that's 60-mile-an-hour straight line winds. I get that in Florida every day. It's not a panacea. It's not perfect. When it fails, you got to dig it up or hopefully pull it through a sleeve. But it definitely performs better. And when you have a system that performs better, you can save money. And customer satisfaction is higher. And when your customer satisfaction is higher, you get more flexibility to go do things that maybe you don't know exactly how it's going to work. It's really not that complicated from a philosophical standpoint. If your customers are happy, your regulators generally are happier. If your regulators are happy, they have a tendency to let you do things and say yes to permission when you ask, like, let me install smart meters. And when you do that, you provide better service to your customer, which makes them happy, and around you go. It's really not that complicated. But it does take a commitment to be different and embrace a lot of different technologies and have a different culture of not being afraid of innovation. And that's why we're so focused on this, to understand that it makes a difference every day in people's lives, and it definitely makes a difference when they're thinking about you the most, which typically, I should say, is right after a storm. So we had some big storms last year in Florida. And we go back and we actually look at how did we perform in all of these different events. Undergrounding, you can see some of these numbers of how the system performed compared to the above ground lines in the exact same area during the storms. And I just want to give you an example on transmission. Transmission, as you know, is like the superhighway of electricity. If your transmission system is down, it makes no difference if anything else is operating, because the electricity can't get from the power plant to the home or business. And transmission structures are big. So you can't ask a couple of linemen, I've got some really big burly guys, but they can't carry a transmission structure in on their shoulders and get it installed after a storm. You need cranes. And after a hurricane, cranes are like unicorns, right? And if the area is flooded, it doesn't make any difference as a crane can't get in. So what does it mean? It just means your system is down. So we saw this and learned this the hard way. This is a picture of one of our transmission towers or lines during Ian, right? You can't get a crane in there anyway. Fortunately, those were standing. We changed the way we thought about our transmission system starting after the 04-05 hurricane season in Florida. We got hit by 7 major hurricanes in 18 months. And as you can see from this chart, the first one, Charlie, which is actually a relatively small storm from a footprint, but strong, right? Knocked down 75 transmission structures. 75 transmission structures were knocked down. And so basically all of Southwest Florida was in the dark for almost 3 weeks because we were rebuilding transmission structures. And then one storm after another, finishing with Wilma, which knocked down another 100 transmission structures. And we said, we got to change. We got to really look at how we do this. And of course, you'd be shocked, but there were people in the company that said, we've been doing this way for, since Edison. So we'll just rebuild it the exact same way. It's all good. No. So we went on a march. We went on a march to change the way you do transmission. You really can't underground transmission for electrical reasons. It's really hard. And in Florida, the water table is like that far underneath the soil. So it's hard. What we did do is we went back and looked at our system and said, what we need to do? We need to take all wood out. And we also need to make everything a lot stronger, shorten the spans. And so we started this march of taking every bit of wood out of our system and rebuilding 7,000 plus miles of transmission, starting in 2006. And on December 16th of last year, we pulled our last wood pole out of our system and replaced it with concrete. I don't have a single wood pole in the transmission system in Peninsular Florida for FPL. Not one. And does it make a difference? Look at the right side of that. Irma hit us in 2017. Irma was a massive storm that came ashore in South Florida and went up the entire peninsula of Florida. Category 4 storm. We lost 5 structures. And in the process, because we only lost 5 structures, we actually restored more people faster than any utility in the history of the United States. Last year we had Ian hit us. Ian was the 5th most powerful hurricane ever to hit North America. Stronger than Irma. We lost 0 transmission structures. Not one. And any of you remember any of the pictures, because it was on the national news pretty much every night, buildings, concrete buildings were wiped away from storm surge as an example. Right? And the winds were horrific, and the flooding was horrific. And had we lost transmission structures, we would not have been able to get in to fix them for at least 10 days. We restored 1.6 million customers, those are meters, in 24 hours or less. You can't do that if your transmission structure is lying on the ground. It's just physically impossible. What's that worth? If you're out of power, people say it's worth everything. But let's just look in terms of economics. It's a $1.4 trillion economy. We serve 2/3 of the state of Florida. So that means just by back of the envelope, simple, it's not economically valid, don't get me, but you know, it's basically $3 billion plus of GDP a day. We've invested $4 billion to upgrade our transmission and distribution system in the last decade, $4 billion. We shaved off at least 4 days of storm restoration just on one storm. You can at least make I know you wouldn't give me an A on this, but an argument that the payback is pretty fast. Just in economic terms of what you can do when you invest in the system. Because you know what? Florida was back up on her feet and the economy is going much faster than it otherwise would have happened, but for those investments. When we initially went in to ask permission to do those, a lot of pushback. What's the payback? How is it going to really benefit customers? Because the transmission system, it's not something that you see every single day, and people are, I don't really get it. Now, folks understand and appreciate it. So it really is a march to get all these things done, and then you figure out what am I going to do with also all of this new knowledge, and how are some of the other benefits that you maybe didn't see what they would be when you put them in. When we installed smart meters, we really didn't understand the amount of data we were going to get and understand the things that we would be able to do with that data. Now we're predicting outages before they occur. Now during storms, we're actually able to use that data coupled with a bunch of other pieces of equipment like automatic lateral switches, automatic feeder, all of these smart grid technology, and we're actually restoring customers in the middle of hurricanes while it's going. And all of our people are hunkered down because it's unsafe to be outside. We actually restored 400,000 customers during Hurricane Ian during the storm. Lights went out. We switched people around. We looped the systems physically before. We used the smart grid technology. We got 400,000 people back up before the storm even cleared. And we used a variety of different technologies on the generation front also to supplement it. So solar is one example. I have this up. I'm going to talk a little bit more about solar because I know we are talking about renewable energy in this conference. And I get this question all the time. Yeah, but how'd your solar do in the hurricane? In Hurricane Ian? Hurricane Ian hit 38 of our solar facilities. We actually have more solar facilities in operation than any utility in America by far. 63. 38 were hit by hurricane force winds. 0.03% of panels were damaged. Out of 12.5 million panels that got hit with hurricane force winds, we had 3,500 and I think 30 that were damaged. Irrelevant from an output perspective. So that's part of resiliency too. Just like good financial portfolio, you want to have a mix and a variety of generation portfolio. And that's why we've invested in things like solar, which again has been something that we have been on a march for decades. So our first solar facility, 1984, in Miami. It was really tiny because it was really expensive. But you know, it was like, hey, this technology that NASA's kind of developing, we should understand more about it. And we figured out it works, but it's not economic, so we didn't do anything with it. And then we started looking at it again in the mid-2000s. And by 2009, we actually built our first solar facility in Florida that was 25 megawatts. Today, that seems kind of quaint, but back then, that was a really big deal. That was the largest solar facility in America by far. And it was the largest facility ever built at one time in the world. It was such a big deal that at the time, the President of the United States flew in to commission it. And then we went from there. Why? Because we figured out that actually at scale, it starts to make economic sense. And you can actually build these things and save customers money. Because yes, guess what? We don't buy fuel. And we don't use water, which in Florida is also precious. And so we decided, you know what, it makes sense, we're going to actually go big with this. And so about 5 years ago, we announced that we were going to install 10,000 megawatts of power. The truth is, nobody knows outside of this room, you guys know what it is, but most people don't know what the heck a megawatt is. All right, so one of the things that I always try to do is figure out how do you communicate with people, so you try to get buy-in. So 30 million panels is 10,000 megawatts. And any ESPN fans here? 30 by 30? 30 million panels by 2030, right? That's what we said we were going to do. And at the time, people said, a lot of folks, including, by the way, in the environmental community, that's just hype, that'll never happen, that shouldn't go forward, blah, blah, blah. You know what? They're right. We're not going to do 30 million panels by 2030, we're going to do it by 2025. We're 5 years ahead of schedule, and not a single project is over budget. And last year, we didn't buy $400 million worth of fuel because of our existing solar facilities that are in operation. Fuel savings is a huge deal because it falls directly to the bottom line of the customer bill. That's one of the reasons we're so focused on all these technologies. I'll give you one more number. $14 billion. That's how much we have not purchased in fuel since starting our march to go from oil-fired to gas-fired to solar and to other technologies since 2001. Just in fuel efficiency, not because gas prices have gone down or up or whatever, just the spread in fuel efficiency has allowed us to not buy and therefore charge customers $14 billion worth of fuel. All right, and I'm going. Sorry, I'm almost done.
Do you want to do any quick Q&A at all?
Okay.
We got just a few minutes.
So I tell you all that because that's one of the reasons that we're able to actually get the support, because we really focus on the customers, making sure they can afford the power. We invest in battery technology. This is the world's largest battery that's now in operation. It's coupled to a solar facility. It charges it every day. It's 400 megawatts, 409 megawatts that ends up providing power when the sun goes down low in the horizon, because I need extra power towards the end of the day when people still run their air conditioners, but the sun is low in the horizon. Is it a silver bullet? No. But does it make sense? Yes. Green hydrogen is another technology we're looking at. Electrolyzers been around a long time. They just typically burn oil or coal to generate electricity to run an electrolyzer, split the water molecule from hydrogen and oxygen, and you take the hydrogen and you burn it. That's what we're doing, but we're doing it now at this site. This is actually under construction at a site that is powered by a solar facility. So an electrolyzer powered by a solar facility taking water, creating hydrogen that then gets piped and put into an existing gas-fired plant, and we blend that in and take our foot off the natural gas. We're not burning as much methane because now we're burning hydrogen. Silver bullet? No. Exciting potential? Absolutely. So this is what we're focused on, and I find this is the most fascinating time ever to be in this space, because there's a lot of opportunities to do a lot of different things that really will change the world. But it has to be done economically, and it has to be done in a manner that customers will continue to get the value proposition that they've been promised. Reliable, affordable, and yes, clean. And if we continue to work together on this, then we can get there. And Texas is a lot like Florida, by the way. A lot of the similarities. Growing population, you have organic growth, you're blessed with that. A lot of challenges, though, on meeting the needs on reliability, but ultimately we have a responsibility, in my opinion, to the next generation to make sure that we actually get this right. Because ultimately, I mean, look, I have a junior in college right now, and I want him and I want his generation to focus on how to solve the world's problems going forward, rather than focusing on trying to fix the things we left behind. And so working together on this and understanding there is no panacea really does make a huge difference. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. Thank you. Happy to open up the Q&A. Anytime?
Thank you, Eric. Eric. Well, I think we're going to have to take a quick break and then come back at 3. So first of all, thank you
You're very
on behalf
welcome.
of TCU. And then if you have questions, maybe come up and just talk to Eric during the break, and then we'll start to get our next panel ready to roll.
Okay.
Mike?